Yes, it's number one. It's Top of the Pops.
I think they've finished. A few weeks ago, I was at a launch party for a new book called Top of the Pops, the 50th anniversary book by Patrick Humphries and Steve Blacknell. Nearly 200 pages and fully illustrated, and the book is published by Magnider and Grace at £25. And I've got Patrick Humphries with me today, and during the show you're going to hear interviews that I did with 5 chart names during the book launch in London. And Patrick, we started off there with Whole Lotta Love, which is a Led Zeppelin song performed by CCS. How did it come to be Top of the Pops' signature tune?
Well, you're right. It was originally a Led Zeppelin song from the second album, and was selected in 1973 to be the theme for the programme after many years of equally familiar theme, which was percussion piece, which was the Top of the Pops Orchestra. Ironically, of course, the Zeppelin song, the title song to the best-known sort of TV charts programme by a band who never released a single in the UK in their lifetime, and of course never appeared on the programme.
I mean, were they just being bloody minded not to release singles and not appear on Top of the Pops?
Well, Spencer, as you know, Zeppelin were an albums band, and one thing that came across researching this book about the programme was there was that very clear distinction between chart acts, actually released singles and wanted to get in the top 40 and on Top of the Pops, and what you might call underground acts, albums bands, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Caravan, some of whom, of course, did appear when they did get hit singles. Some, of course, who appeared on the short-lived albums slot on the programme. But primarily, Zeppelin were an albums band, and it's hard now to remember there was that distinction made.
Although actually Zeppelin did have hit singles in the States, didn't they? So they didn't sort of stick to their policy at all times.
No. I think the States was that big market they couldn't ignore. But I think over here they were seen very much as front page of Melody Maker and pretty cool underground guys.
Yeah. Now a lot of the time, perhaps half the chart are full of American acts, and yet. In the pre-video world, the American acts were quite happy to come over, weren't they, and perform on the show?
Well, they were. I mean, I think what's interesting, again, when I was researching the book, there's a great deal of prescience in the commissioning of Top of the Pops, and it was Bill Cotton, head of BBC Latin Entertainment, son of the famous band leader, who saw that there was room for a programme based around the charts, because in late '63, from where you're broadcasting, the whole Merseybeat thing had really exploded and kicked off, and Bill Cotton appreciated you could do a programme that didn't have to rely on American acts, so of course course, throughout 63 and 64, you had all the great Mersey beat groups as well as groups from Manchester and Birmingham and London. But yes, the visiting Americans, once the programme was established, were only too happy to appear. Elvis, of course, never did, but they got pretty well everyone else.
Well, they got the Everly Brothers, and the Everly Brothers had a number 2 hit in 1965 with The Price of Love. Of course, we had the news of Phil Everly dying yesterday.
Yes.
What are your memories of the Everly Brothers? I mean, how high do you rate them? Are they up there with Elvis and the Beatles?
I think that the gap between Elvis and the Beatles is an interesting point. I mean, John and Paul admitted early on that they wanted their harmonies to sound like the Everly Brothers. Famously, so did Simon and Garfunkel. In fact, the last time I saw the Everlys, they were special guests on the Simon and Garfunkel reunion tour in 2004, I think it was. And I think at one point, Paul Simon suggested they should have a whole wing of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame devoted to those duos who got on so well, like the Everlys and Simon and Garfunkel and the Eagles. But yes, I mean, I think they were tremendously influential. I mean, for Simon and Garfunkel alone, that drew on those harmonies, as of course famously did the Beatles. Bob Dylan was a huge Everlys fan. It's quite a surprising thing. I think it was a point that you made on BBC television earlier today, that they were one of the first mainstream acts to really bring a country influence to the pop charts.
Well, indeed. I mean, my take on it is my father loathed rock and roll, and he loathed the Everly Brothers more than anyone else. And it's only recently I've realised why, and that is because they sang so high. And prior to the Everly Brothers, we'd never heard anyone singing like that. And of course, there was this whole country tradition of the Delmore Brothers and the Blue Sky Boys who sang like that.
Yeah, Luther Brothers.
Nobody here knew of that.
No.
So they were like brand new.
No, that's right. I mean, I think our British equivalent in the UK was Mickey and Griff. So the Everlys really were a breath of fresh air. And I remember, in fact, I saw Simon and Garfunkel at the Albert Hall in 1970 when they were touring to promote their new album, Bridge Over Troubled Water, which they played, plus a selection of hits. But they also did that Silver-Haired Daddy of Mine, which was an Everly song, which is a really mawkish country and western song. And I remember at the time as a teenager being quite surprised that a sort of a hip happening act like Simon and Garfunkel would include such a song in their repertoire. And of course that was directly learned from the Everlys.
Yeah, and the Everlys were just paying tribute to their father, wasn't it? And the songs that they'd learned, so that was terrific.
That's right, and of course that same year, Dylan's Self-Portrait, which got the worst reviews of his career. Now, of course, it's been restored and it's getting some of the best reviews of his career. But of course, that included Take a Message to Mary on it, again drawn from the Everly Brothers catalogue. So, I mean, they're not as perhaps well known as Elvis, and I personally don't think were as influential as, say, Eddie Cochran or Buddy Holly. But certainly in that first fiery fusillade, if you will, of rock and roll, they were definitely in the front line.
And they certainly had the best hair in the business. And when I was reading your book, Patrick, I saw that the artist who was most often on Top of the Pops was, surprise, surprise, Cliff Richard.
Yes, but probably no surprise there really when you think that began having hits in 1958, and by the time the programme was launched had been six years into a successful career, and God bless him, still going strong today. Yes, the act with most appearances was Cliff. The band with most appearances, as far as we could gather, was Status Quo. Again, few surprises there when you think they began having hits in 68 and carried on well into the 21st century. But no, Cliff was there for all the key moments. There's a nice story from Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull saying Cliff was watching Tull rehearse, and he thinks at one point was trying to emulate his one-legged flute-playing position on the other side of the studio, which tragically we never got to see.
Patrick, normally your books are on slightly off-centre artists like Fairport Convention, Tom Waits and Nick Drake. But this time you've gone for the most commercial show in the country, Top of the Pops, and I was quite surprised you were involved in a book on Top of the Pops. I see you've written it with Steve Blacknell, so do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, we all, if you've got a remote this interest in pop music in UK, I mean, you were a Top of the Pops fan, so I mean, I was quite surprised to be honest. I mean, I've known Steve for many years. We when I was on Melody Maker, he was plugging Flock of Seagulls, so I can't quite think how we actually met, but we've been friends for a long time. And he wrote a book about the 20th anniversary history of Top of the Pops in '84, and very sensibly got the rights back for this for the 50th anniversary. So we collaborated on it, and I must admit, I was a bit sort of thought, well, I don't know, there's so much I can bring to it. There have been a couple of very good books on Top of the Pops already, but as I sort of researched and began writing it, I mean, it is a shadow history of British pop. I mean, you know, you've had, as I say, I think really apart from Elvis, I mean, pretty well every major actor from every genre at some point or other made an appearance on Top of the Pops during its 42-year history. And I think that in itself is quite interesting. The brand, probably after Doctor Who, is probably the best loved British television programme, I would suggest. And, you know, as a fan, as a viewer, I mean, I've just got very, very fond memories of watching the programme, so it was a real joy to dip back into it.
Yeah, and the launch party was tremendous. I don't want you to mention anyone who was there because I want to surprise the listeners tonight.
Right.
But it was a tremendous launch for the book, one of the best book launches I've ever been to.
Oh, fantastic. No, it was great, and that's down to Blacknell, who's got some very good contacts in the music industry over the years. It was at a venue called The Heights, which is very near Broadcasting House, so we got some sort of BBC people dropping in. So no, it was a very good night, and Sean Tilley, who was very helpful, got some lovely clips of the programme from over the years. So yes, it was a good night, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed, and we'll hear my first interview now. I'm talking to Anita Harris here. Just let me have your memories.
Hello,
Yes.
how lovely to see you again.
Just let me have your memories of Top of the Pops.
My memories of Top of the Pops are of an innovative time with some wonderful people, but the biggest memory I have is I was singing Trains and Boats and Planes, and in the studio Dusty Springfield was singing You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, and she waited for my rehearsal to finish, and she came across to me and she said, Anita, you and Mike have to meet my brother Tom Springfield. I think he's got a song for you. And that song was Just Loving You. And God bless her. I look up to heaven and I say thank you, Dusty, because it was such a generous thing for her to do. And she was a lovely, lovely girl. She really was. So that's my strongest memory of Top of the Pops. And the others are, it was such a happy time, a joyous time. And the music was, it lifted the hearts, you know. And all the people, of course, the producers, the directors, and the team were wonderful. It could only be a beacon in my memory.
Were you always doing it live?
I think we did a couple of miming ones. We all got quite good at that. I guess because it was the beginning of everything musically. And then it blossomed. Everything blossomed from that show. You know, it was joyous to be part of it.
And last time I saw you, you were taking part in a thriller that was on stage in St Helens.
I've just finished A Murder Has Been Arranged, which was an Emlyn Williams production. But mainly this year I've been going around with my one-woman show, reminiscing and showing wonderful memories of working with Harry Seacombe and Jimmy Tarbuck and Clive Dunn and Tommy Cooper and David Nixon and these fabulous people that have been part of my life. Singing, you know, it's so much part of me still. I don't know, I feel young again and very much, you know, a part of what is happening now as well.
You started recording about 1962 or so, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And Top of the Pops started in 64. Were you sort of watching that at first and thinking, I wish I could get on that?
Actually, the first recording I did was a Lionel Bart song called I Haven't Got You, and it was produced by Norman Newell at EMI. So that was a huge learning curve. Actually, before I even started to record properly, was at the Manchester studios, just there watching and being there as a young girl. And it was so exciting, you know. I think it formed a great part in the life of all of us that were around at that time. And isn't it wonderful that it's remained? It's a bit like our Carry On movies, you know. It kind of resuscitates every generation, which is lovely.
It's just a pity they haven't kept everything, of course.
That's a sad side of it. And I think we've all learned lessons that we have to treasure the golden times. But tonight has been part of that, actually, meeting old friends It's been absolutely lovely, really lovely.
Great. Anita Harris, thank you very much indeed.
God bless you.
Well, your book is called Top of the Pops, the 50th anniversary book, and it's got lots and lots of pictures in it, and a lot of these pictures are taken by an old friend of this programme who unfortunately passed on a few months ago, Harry Goodwin.
Yes.
And he was a very lucky photographer, wasn't he? Because all these people had to get ready for the show anyway.
Well, exactly. Yes, he died, unfortunately, just as the book was being finished. I think he actually saw a proof copy, but was very helpful. And obviously, because as the official Top of the Pops photographer for nearly 10 years, he was there during the glory days from 64 to 73. And yes, I mean, it wasn't all done live, so there were rehearsals, an opportunity to photograph the acts as they were rehearsing, or backstage relaxing. There's a lovely photo of the original producer, Johnny Stewart, with a dashing-looking Mick Jagger in there. And right up to Oasis. Well, no, he didn't do Oasis, but I mean, Harry was there for all the great acts as they went into the Top of the Pop studio, either in Manchester or in London.
Yeah, it's a wonderful archive that he had, and I interviewed Dave Davis of the Kinks a few years ago, and I mentioned to him this record, Top of the Pops, that the Kinks did. And in the middle, they do an impersonation of someone. It's actually Harry Goodwin.
Oh, right. I know that. I did not know. As ever, Spencer, I learned from you.
Well, when Harry took a picture of someone, he'd say, "It's a Rembrandt, it's a Rembrandt." And he got everyone to cooperate. He was fantastic at putting people at their ease.
Yeah, there's a nice shot of him taking a photo, I think, of Status Quo in the book. And yes, I mean, he was very blessed, because when you now, of course, you can go online and find every edition of the programme with who appeared on it, and it's a glittering cast, and of course Harry was there for all, as I say, for the glory years.
One of Harry Goodwin's phrases, "shot of a lifetime," is in there.
Yeah, absolutely, which I did not know.
Wonderful record. What about records that mention Top of the Pops? The Kinks aren't the only ones, are they?
Well, no, famously the Rosillos, sort of punkish act, did a record called Top of the Pops, and it's also mentioned on songs by Motley Hoople and the Boomtown Rats. But I think actually just listening to that Kinks record, I think, funnily enough, that record explains why the programme was so popular and how different it is to the pop landscape of today. Because back in the day, the Kinks were making records in the 60s and 70s and having hit records. You saw the programme on a Thursday night, and then with your pocket money or paltry wages, went out and bought that week's your favourite single that you'd seen on the show from. I mean, this is really hard to believe, from any number of high street record stores. HMV or Our Price, Woolworths. W.H. Smith selling singles, and that would get it into the charts. So it would go in at, if you're lucky, into the top 40, then up to 26, then up to 13. So the pop hit records of the day did have a strong career in their own, and that's, of course, what's so different from today.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why Top of the Pops went, isn't it? Because records didn't climb up the charts anymore. Usually they were at their highest position on the first week.
Well, exactly. They went in, and you look at the charts these days. I mean, it's everything. I would estimate over 50% of new entries, and a lot of those of the biggest acts today, Beyonce or whoever, go straight in at number one, then drop out again. Whereas, we remember from the 60s. I mean, even the Beatles, didn't go straight in at number one. I mean, their latest single would probably go top 10 or certainly top 20, but it would be inched up the charts. And of course, that gave the programme its excitement. I mean, there was that real tension at the end of each programme to see what was going to be number one.
Indeed. Well, let's return to the Top of the Pops party now. You weren't the only music writer there, because Mark Lewison was there, and I asked him about the Beatles being on Top of the Pops.
Not live, no. They did appear on Top of the Pops, but they would record specially filmed inserts in the BBC studios. Definitely only for Top of the Pops, but not actually with all the audience and the dancers and everything.
Was there a reason for that? Because, the Rolling Stones would say live with Little Red Rooster?
I'm not actually aware of any reason why they didn't do it, because as far as they were concerned, they did. But in terms of actually appearing in front of an audience, I can't think of any reason why not, because it's not as if, they would have only had to have mimed, and they mimed on Ready Steady Go, and they mimed on Thank You Lucky Stars. So I think they had a relationship with the show, but maybe it just didn't work out. 66, they turned up and did Paperback Writer and Rain, because you could actually do your B-sides on Top of the Pops in those days. And they did that really because Paperback Writer got off to a sluggish start sales-wise, and I think they were keen to just give it a little bit of impetus. They'd made these films for it, but there was nothing like actually being there in the studio to give it an extra push.
When you say they got off to a sluggish start, by anyone else's standards, they'd have got off to a brilliant start, presumably.
Yeah, that's right. But if you look at the Beatles' sales figures, record by record, there was a definite dip with Paperback Writer. It just shows actually how concerned they were maintaining their audience. But of course, yes, the figures that were disappointing them would have been great for anybody else.
Now, I recently was reading Paul Anka's autobiography, and he has the presence of mind when he made Diana when he was 15 to say people are miming badly on TV, I've got to do it well, and he watches himself in the mirror and he gets it right, so people couldn't tell whether he was miming or not. How good were the Beatles at miming? How much did they work on it?
That's a good question. Actually, the Beatles were quite poor at miming. Actually, Paul once told me in an interview that they used to mime, or he used to mime, to, I think, The Great Pretender. Oh yes, I'm the Great Pretender, in the mirror, when he was presumably about 16 or 17. But when they got to actually do it in front of TV cameras, they weren't very good. John was the worst mimer, because generally speaking, he had trouble remembering lyrics. So even if they weren't miming, he would actually sing the wrong words. So he would mime the wrong words instead.
How important do you think Top of the Pops was? Would 60s pop have been different in this country without it?
I don't know about that. I think 70s pop would have been at 80s pop and maybe 90s, and maybe the video had taken over by then. But in the 60s, it was one of a number of shows. Ready, Steady, Go, Thank You, Lucky Stars, to name but two. But various ITV regions had their own programme. Discs A Go-Go in Wales. Scottish Television had one or something similar to it. So I think its importance grew. Once those other shows had fallen away, and Top of the Pops was the only one, and because it had the BBC chart, it was the main show. But in the 60s, it was one of a number. Still the biggest, because it was the BBC and it was national, whereas the others had regional variations.
What have been your favourite moments on Top of the Pops over the years?
Oh, wow. I started watching Top of the Pops when I was about 7, probably about 1965. I remember Tremolos on it quite vividly, doing Suddenly You Love Me and Even the Bad Times Are Good. I remember the Pistols doing Pretty Vacant, which was the first time the Pistols had been seen on Top of the Pops. Mark Bolan and David Bowie, T-Rex and David Bowie, and that kind of period. I think a lot of people would remember that period most, the glam period, the Slade with Noddy Holder and the big mirrored hats and all of that. It was the half hour that your parents had to put up with in the week.
And the artists of that time took a great deal of trouble to look good, didn't they, in that show, or to look different?
You had to make an impact. That was the thing, because you were there because you were in the charts. So you were there because you were already, or your record was already a success. But yes, you definitely wanted to create an impression in whatever way you could. It fed the glam period. And the glam period fed Top of the Pops, but Top of the Pops fed it.
And I know you went to a few Top of the Pops as well as part of the audience. Were you given instructions as to how to dance or what have you when the acts came on?
No, I used to watch them from the observation gallery upstairs. I was never actually down on the studio floor. There was a girl in my year at school, actually the year above me at school, who was a dancer on Top of the... Not a Pants People, but she was in the audience, and the camera picked her out because she was very pretty, and she got invited back time and time again. So that was interesting, but I used to ask her about it. I actually only would watch it from the observation gallery. I was never down bopping on the floor.
And was it great watching it from the observation gallery?
Oh, it was, because you'd see people like David Essex. I think I saw Kate Bush, actually, on it in 78. I enjoyed it, but you would lose a bit of atmosphere up there. But what I understood was it wasn't that atmospheric on the floor either, because the cameras were moving around you all the time. You always had to be aware of them. I think that it's one of those things that, with hindsight, it looks better than it was for those who were there. Just like to be at Top of the Pops is quite a cachet now, but at the time it was probably a fairly average evening, I would have thought.
Kenny Everett was one of the Top of the Pops presenters, wasn't he?
Very briefly, yes. Funnily enough, a lot of the names you'd expect to see on there. I mean, Johnny Walker, God bless him, still going strong on Radio 2. Only did it once. Everett did it very few times. Yes, it's surprising the number of people who didn't do it, actually.
And in your book, you have John Peel deliberately not wanting to do it.
Yes, John Peel's widow said wrote in his autobiography that she thinks it may have been deliberate that he was so bad. I think she'd do the analogy of somebody who cooks dinner so badly that he's never going to ask to cook again, and he did did do it when he was sort of the underground DJ on Radio 1 and was away for about 8 years, but did come back and did it always rather grudgingly. Which I always thought was a bit, you either do it or you don't, but he seemed to be really sour about the whole thing.
Yeah, and didn't he forget the names of people who aren't, or said he did?
Yes, and there was that sort of grouchy Peel irony to every appearance, which was, in contrast to sort of Smashy and Nicey DJs who populated the programme largely, he was quite a welcome relief. But I always had the feeling, if you either did it, because it was I think Mark Lewis made a very good point earlier that it was the 70s that really saw Top of the Pops coming of age. I would slightly dispute that it wasn't as impactful in the 60s, but it was the programme to be seen on, and it was a popular programme. It was the X Factor of its day. It was the pop idol of its day, because the acts that were on there because the records they made were bought by large numbers of people, their fans, their fan base. That's what dictated the content of the programme. So it was a sort of popularity show in a way.
And do you think someone like David Bowie made a real effort to look sensational?
Well, I think David Bowie would have crawled through fire to get on Top of the Pops. He was on a couple of times famously before his famous breakthrough appearance. He was on playing piano behind Peter Noon, who had a hit with "Though You Pretty Thing," which is a Bowie song from Hunky Dory, and of course was on during when he had a hit with Space Odyssey in the late 60s. But in the book there's a wonderful book by I hesitate to plug another writer's book, but there's a wonderful book called The Complete David Bowie by Nicholas Pegg, which is dauntingly comprehensive, and he writes in that, more than any other individual performance, it was this one iconic television spot which catapulted Bowie to stardom. This is talking about Starman in July 72. It's deceptively easy to forget that in the summer of 72 David Bowie was still yesterday's news to the average viewer of Top of the Pops, a one-hit wonder who'd had a novelty single about an astronaut at the end of the previous decade. 3 minutes on Top of the Pops in a rainbow jumpsuit and shocking red hair put paid to that forever. And it's undeniably the performance that made Bowie's career. Without that he wouldn't be celebrated as he is today, and is arguably, I think, one of the pivotal TV pop performances of all time. I've
done some interviews at the Top of the Pops party, the launch party for the book, and this is a double whammy, this one, because from the early 70s Pterodactyl and the Dinosaurs had a hit with Seaside Shuffle, and they were kept from the top of the charts by Alice Cooper. But who was Pterodactyl? Well, it turns out to be John Louis. So when was he first on Top of the Pops?
I was first on it in 1972. That was with Seaside Shuffle.
It was on Jonathan King's label, wasn't it?
It was, actually. It came about because I bought an accordion from a junk shop, and it was an old accordion that was built between the two world wars. Italian, lovely little instrument, and I learned how to play it, which was not too difficult to do because I had already played keyboards, which was black and white notes, the same kind of system, and I was used to a piano. And I was very heavily influenced at that time by Cajun music, which was like Zydeco music. Zydeco music was like the black version of Cajun music, and Cajun music was music that originated in shall we say, Arcadia, which was part of Canada. But the British pushed them south and they ended up in Louisiana, where the Negro, as they were called then, picked up the accordion and played their sense of music on the accordion. And their sense of music, of course, was blues music, R&B, rock and roll. So you were able to play rock and roll on the accordion. That's what Zydeco music was. And a Seaside Shuffle was a 12-bar blues. And of course, a 12-bar blues was the basis of very many earlier rock and roll records and rhythm and blues records.
In the late 70s, of course, you were on the Stiff label. This was a new wave label associated with punk and the like, but you've been around for a number of years. Did you consider yourself a punk and new wave artist?
Yes, I did, in a way. I was at the Vortex in Wardour Street on the night that Elvis Presley died. All the punks were pogoing in this club, and the DJ announced over the tannoy system, Elvis Presley's just died. And all the punks bounced up and down and said, hooray! Because to them it was like an old-style, old-fashioned thing. But then the editor of Sniffing Glue, Mark Perry, who ran a punk magazine, and indeed a DJ, I can't quite remember his name actually, the very close friend of Ginger, of Chris Evans.
Oh, Danny Baker.
Yeah, that's the one. They both got up on stage and said, "No, you guys, you got it wrong. Elvis Presley was one of us. He was a punk." And I went home that night and wrote a song called Elvis Presley Was the First Punk. In other words, there is a massive link between 50s rock and roll and the ethos of punk in the 70s. Yeah. They've both got that edge, that blues edge, that black edge, that R&B edge. And so I didn't consider myself to be out of step with the punk thing at all. The Sex Pistols were dynamite. It was a great rock and roll record.
You had this huge hit with Stop the Cavalry. It strikes me as a very unusual song for a person to write. What had inspired that?
Musically, what inspired it was simple folk tunes, a bit like Leadbelly. Yeah. And playing it on the accordion tonight made me think of that. It was like sort of Hully Leadbelly, Leadbelly. So musically, I grew up loving nursery rhymes, and a simple tune is often just simply a nursery rhyme, whether it be a rock and roll tune or a classics tune, a grassroots tune, anything like that. And what inspired the lyrical side was that I started off with a line which was, "Can you end the gallantry? Can you end the gallantry?" It made me think of the Crimean War, so I changed gallantry to cavalry. And I thought of the Charge of the Light Brigade, where they charged to their deaths. And I thought, how terrible, And so it became a slightly anti-war sort of thing, lyrically. Not so much an anti-war thing, but more of a humanistic treatise of war generally, where the human being is in this situation, like in the trenches in the Great War, or in the nuclear fallout zone.
And you're thinking of Christmas time as well, the Christmas time in the trenches.
Well, I thought that at Christmas time it's even more poignant for the solitary soldier in the trench, cold and hungry. People at home are having their Christmas dinner, not even their Sunday lunch. And he's out there cold and rather hungry. Wish I was at home at Christmas. That's how the Christmas thing came into it. And the record company released it to tie in with that, which I supported, actually. I thought, clever marketing, why not?
Did you always enjoy being on Top of the Pops?
Yeah, because that was like a marker of how well your career was going. It was a great experience the first time round, and there was a dearth of that kind of level for 8 years, even though I'd done things that I'm proud of. But I didn't get back to that level again until 8 years later.
Great. Well, it's been very good to talk to you, Jonah. Hope we see you in Liverpool at some stage.
I don't perform very much at all anyway, but I aim to be doing a lot more. Yeah. And I would actually like to do a tour of local radio stations.
Jonah Louis,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Well, there's another Top of the Pops signature tune, and Patrick, would you like to tell us about that? Was that written for the show?
Yes, written by Phil Lynott of Thin Lizzy, Yellow Pearl. It was the theme from 81 to 86, replacing the Zeppelin Whole Lotta Love, which was there. I think it's one of the... Well, what I found talking about the book to people is that there's a very strong Proustian, if you will, association with Top of the Pops themes, and also the logos. We've got all the logos from the various eras reproduced in the book, and I think everyone's got their own favourite period, and I think the logo and the theme song certainly reflect that.
Yeah, and It's interesting, isn't it? It's just the 40 seconds of the track that you actually know. You know, the song almost comes as a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even the CCS version of Whole Lotta Love, that intro, I don't think I'd ever heard before. Yes, you're so used to it. But this is my theory about a lot of repeats on television. Sometimes, you know, all these repeats from over the years, not just Top of the Pops, but sometimes all you need is the theme song and the opening credits, and that's enough, because the rest of the programme isn't actually that good.
And we've lined up a record you asked me to bring in now, which is one of the most famous records ever made, A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum. And is Top of the Pops particularly significant for that record?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, I think people forget just how influential a record it was at the time, and how otherworldly it sounded. You know, you hear it in lifts and elevators and easy listening versions now, but the original Procol Harum version, I think, is a fantastically haunting record. And looking at clips of them performing it on YouTube, there's a wonderful clip of them doing it. It's about the 6th week it's been number one, and Gary Brooker's done up as the sort of Fu Manchu with the Mandarin moustache. And the audience aren't quite sure how to react to it, you know, because it's such an odd sound, so they're sort of waltzing to it, you know. It's a lovely clip. I still think it's a remarkably good record.
Yeah, and didn't Matthew Fisher come in a cloak or something?
That's right, he came dressed as a monk in a monk's cowl, and then Steve Blacknell, my co-author, interviewed Gary Brooker, who said he almost had a punch-up with Engelbert Humperdinck in the Top of the Pop studio, because Engelbert, of course, famously kept the Beatles' Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever off the top in 1967, you know, so regularly voted the greatest pop single ever made, denied the top spot by Engelbert, and Gary Brooker took great issue with this until he realised that Engelbert was actually quite a big lad and towered over him, so Peace and Love didn't always find its way into Top of the Pop studio in 1967.
We'll go back to the Top of the Pops party now, and one of the most eccentric names ever to make the charts is John Otway, who made the top 30 in 1977 with Really Free, and the top 10 in 2002, 25 years later, with Bunsen Burner. What were his memories of Top of the Pops?
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, the thing is that when you were growing up, I mean, it was the thing to be on. Even so later on in life, you got a cab somewhere and you told the cab driver and they asked, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm a pop star.
Yes.
Their question was, well, have you done Top of the Pops? And if you said yes, then you were a pop star. If you said no, then you were just somebody who was trying to be a pop star.
Yes.
I mean, it was one of those sort of markers that you remember. I remember first time I played it, the Dooleys. I remember going and having a beer in the bar with the Dooleys. Yeah. Really good, fun mixture of people.
And who was number one when you were on?
The first time, Mull of Kintyre. Yeah, Mull of Kintyre was number one.
There's a famous performance of you where you nearly do yourself a terrible injury on TV. That was on the Old Grey Whistle test, wasn't it?
It was quite sort of like overnight stardom. Me and Wild Willie were sort of like gigging. I mean, we started building up a bit of a following, which got us onto the Old Grey Whistle test. And then I did this performance on the Old Grey Whistle test. It was my first bit of national television, so I was going for it. And I leapt on top of this amplifier. Yeah. And one leg went one side, the other leg went the other side. Yeah. And I landed on the delicate parts of my anatomy. What was weird was life before that went out on telly was quite different to life afterwards.
Yes.
We had the single Really Free out at the time, which before that Whistle Test performance was selling like 25, 30 copies a day. The day after the Whistle Test, it was selling hundreds of copies a day, and then within 2 or 3 weeks, we were on Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
So that was directly led to, to the Top of the Pops appearance.
Yeah. But were you in pain for a couple of days afterwards?
I remember sort of several days afterwards thinking, but then thinking, well, it was worth it. And it was. I mean, it's not a sensible day's work since.
And the other side of Really Free, be careful of the flowers, they're going to get you, yeah? That was voted one of the best poems of the century, wasn't it?
The biggest mistake probably of my career was we had 2 really good songs, we put them both on the same record. Had we split them up, you know, I wouldn't have had to wait 25 years for another hit. I would have had one straight away.
And when you see Really Free now, you're the one that's doing all the action while Willie's just sort of standing there.
Yeah, I mean, Willie was a great musician. It was me that was the poser. He became Wild Willie Barrett because we had an argument about whose name came first, and I said, well, why don't you have yours second but put Wild in front of it?
25 years later, you have another hit, and this was really because of all your fans getting together, wasn't it? There's a real body of Otway fans.
Yes, I think a lot of them got sick of this introduction. I used to walk on stage saying, I'm going to start with a medley of my hit, and the only way to stop me or to change the set really, was to have another hit. We just put a campaign together to have a hit for my 50th birthday. And it worked. I mean, everybody got behind the whole concept, and I had another hit and got back on Top of the Pops.
Yeah. And looking back over the years with Top of the Pops, what have been your favourite moments by other performers?
Joe Cocker particularly, with our help from my friends. It was a thing you just did religiously watch. My parents refused to have a television in the house. So Thursday evening I would specifically go round to my mate's house to watch Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
It's the only regular television programme I actually did that for.
And it's great in the Top of the Pops book. You tell a wonderful tale about going to Top of the Pops, not in a sort of chauffeur-driven limousine or anything.
Yeah, because I just lived in Fulham at the time, and we did it twice. And the first time they sent the limousine round, and the second time I thought it'd actually be quite cool to turn up to Top of the Pops on my bike. And it's really funny because I had a girl's bike with a basket on the front, I think. I thought it'd be funny. Turns out, I suppose it was a bit of the taste of things to come.
And what about performing? Are you coming to Liverpool again soon?
Oh, I should think so, yes. I must see the Cavern again.
That was great, I saw that.
Did a couple of really good shows there. And the venue deserves supporting. I mean, it's nice that there's a venue there. And they've got a very good sound system. And it's a good place to play.
OK, well, John Otway, thanks very much indeed.
Great to see you in Liverpool.
Yeah. And I was talking there to John Otway about his hits Really Free and Bunsen Burner and Top of the Pops. And my main guest today is Patrick Humphries, who's written this book with Steve Blacknell on Top of the Pops, the 50th anniversary. And Patrick, John Otway was saying his favourite performance on Top of the Pops was Joe Cocker singing With a Little Help from My Friends. And I can remember that as a fantastic performer, because first time you see him, he's just sensational. What about your favourites?
Pretty well all the records you've been playing tonight. I have to say Otway and Barrett were great, and I heartily suggest that anyone with any interest in pop music goes to see the DVD of John Otway the movie. It's the best rock video film since Don't Look Back. It's breathtakingly good. Moving on,
you don't think he's breathtakingly bad?
No, I think he's great. I think he's a true. I think he genuinely is a national treasure, Otway, and I think that status will be confirmed when people get to see the movie, which he's trying to get nominated for a BAFTA, and he's on his way to trying to get nominated for an Oscar. I mean, you cannot but admire that ambition. I think the 70s were the high watermark at Top of the Pops. You were getting 1 in 4 of the adult population watching it. So yes, I think a lot. Of course, so many of the shows from the 60s have been wiped, so you've only got your memories to rely on. And as Mark Lewison said earlier, a lot of the Beatle performances were little clips which we've seen later on. I have very fond memories of the 70s. I mean, the glam rock period. I mean, Mud, Slade, Roxy. They all seem to be having such fun on it. They all knew how silly they looked, but they really seem to be enjoying it. And moving on to the sort of punk era, Elvis Costello, there was that sort of intensity of performance when Elvis was on with the Attractions.
Yeah, well, I saw that last night on BBC 4, and you were in it. It was a programme called Top of the Pops 1979, and it was talking about the discussions as to whether Elvis Costello could actually sing his original lyric for Oliver's Army.
Yes, indeed. Yes, the use of the N-word now, of course, is prohibited virtually everywhere. But I mean, he never fought shy of a controversy, Elvis. And I mean, I still think one of the great. I mean, those first 6 albums, he didn't put a foot wrong, and I think he's a truly great talent. One of the great British songwriters. So always a delight to see him. I mean, I have to say, in all honesty, the last time I got really excited about what was going to be number 1 on Top of the Pops, we are going back probably to Fairy Tale of New York in 87, where it was either going to be the Pet Shop Boys cover of Always on My Mind or the Pogues' Fairy Tale of New York. And that week, of course, the Pet Shop Boys beat them to it. One of the great disappointments in UK chart history. But there you go. That was the nature of the beast. I mean, more people bought the Pet Shop Boys than bought the Pogues that week.
Yeah, more Pet Shop Boys fans than Pogues fans.
Yeah, simple as that, exactly. And that
but over the years, of course, they've picked up so many sales, haven't they?
Well, exactly, yes. But I mean, that was the nature of the programme. I mean, as I was saying earlier, you know, you heard a record you liked on Radio 1, you then went out and bought it on Saturday morning. And of course, you know, you have to remember during the glory years of Top of the Pops in the 60s and the 70s, you know, there really wasn't that much choice. I mean, when the programme began in 1964, 50 years ago, there were only 2 black and white television channels. And the timing was absolutely perfect because we had Mersey Beat, we had the Beatles, we had the Stones were just beginning and all those great 60s groups. But it was on, the first programme aired about 6 weeks before the Beatles went to America for the first time. So it really was a sort of UK phenomenon. Then it went to the world. And then, of course, in the 60s and the 70s, you had all those great acts coming from the UK. And the programme also, when it moved to London in 1966 from Manchester, of course, that was the year London was declared the swingingest city in the world by Time magazine. It became Swinging London officially in 1966, the year the Top of the Pops moved down to London. And of course, that provided a shop window for all the Carnaby Street fashions. And a very good writer called Eddie Fiegel wrote a great essay for the book about Top of the Pops and fashion, and how much the programme dictated to fashion, because whether you were in, you know, Birkenhead or Penzance or whatever, for a lot of people, your only glimpse of all the fashions from King's Road or Carnaby Street was on Top of the Pops.
And Pan's people, I suppose, were important in that connection.
Oh, yes, whatever they were. Mind you, I think some of the dance routines they had to do perhaps were in costume that tied in with a single from an actor who couldn't make it to the programme, so they weren't that... But there is that great thing, looking at the Top of the Pops audience, when everyone's always literally looking over their shoulder to see if they're on the monitor, to see if they're going to be seen on telly. And then they all do, there's that curious little Top of the Pops shuffle, which is sort of standing in one place and the shoulders moving nervously around. But a couple of journalists I know who used to go up to the studio regularly said it was quite a dangerous place to be, because those big old television cameras were like Daleks crashing through the audience, and sometimes you see glimpses of and they're actually terrified look on the audience's faces.
Yeah. I can remember a performance of someone who didn't want to be on once, and that was Steeler's Wheel doing Stuck in the Middle with You, and I think Jerry Rafferty kept his mouth shut during that whole mime.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, and of course there are the famous instances of the miming. I mean, I think Fish from Marillion did a sort of Bob Dylan holding up the Q Castle lyrics. Nick Lowe sort of is famously seen sort of giggling during Love the Sound of Breaking Glass. Then I think Oasis swapped instruments on a couple of shows. I mean, the whole miming thing was sort of a knowing wink to the audience.
And John Peel was part of Lindisfarne, wasn't he? Playing...
No, the Faces. He was on famously with Rod Stewart and the Faces, playing mandolin when they did Maggie May. No known expert of the instrument, Mr. Peel, but bravely plucking away. No, it was. I mean, that was part of the fun of it. It has to be said.
Someone I didn't see at your party, but I know he was there because there was a little cabaret as well with John Otway and Jonah Louis and the likes performing. And you mentioned that Tony Burrows was there, who we've had on this programme in the past, and he's got a special place in Top of the Pops history, hasn't he?
Yes, I think Sir Cliff is the one act who's been on more episodes of Top of the Pops in its 42-year history. Tony Burrows, I think, is the one act who's been on more appearances on one programme. A session singer who in, I think, 1970 appeared in 3 different guises in 3 different groups on one edition of Top of the Pops, and was denied a 4th appearance because I think the producer felt it really was taking the mickey a bit. But yes, I mean, he's certainly in the record books there.
Now, returning to the Top of the Pops party in London, we have Graham Fellows now, who is now John Shuttleworth, but in 1978 he was Jilted John. And what did he remember of Top of the Pops?
Oh yes, I did, very much so. And I used to love the black and white films. I remember seeing Johnny Osmond singing Puppy Love, and for about 3 weeks I thought he was a girl, because he looked like a girl, and he was sort of on the roundabout and singing like a girl and looking like a girl, but it was a boy. What else do I remember? Well, it's great, seeing people like John Otway sing tonight and Jonah Louis. I think the biggest shame is that Top of the Pops is not an existing TV programme. I think everyone agrees that, because it was actually something that everybody came together and watched, and it's unbelievable that it's not there, because everyone says there's nothing on.
Well, it's really because the nature of the charts changed, didn't it? And you didn't have that variety.
The two are related, surely, because Top of the Pops galvanised people's opinions, and they helped perpetuate people buying records. And once the show went, I think the charts inevitably became less popular, and it's very sad. I mean, maybe events like this can actually help Top of the Pops have a revival, maybe even become recommissioned. I mean, it just seemed crazy that even a small channel, why the hell is it not happening? Because it's, I mean, Top of the Pops 2 is incredibly successful. Sean Chudder's show is very popular, just a radio show, so yeah, it's a shame.
What about appearing as Jilted John on the show?
I was on 3 times. The first time was probably the most memorable. But anyway, the last one was the most memorable. I've had a glass of red wine. Spencer, is that all right? There's a party. The last one was the most memorable because I forgot my words on the last bit, you know. I'm so upset, yeah. I forgot that bit. And then I sort of, for about 2 bars, it was a piece of music, you know. It was punk, but it was a piece of music. It had bars. I just sort of went, and then I sort of recovered. But that's kind of nice, you know, it was live, and I mean, if I'd been miming, it would have been awful. But I was actually singing a live vocal. Most people didn't, they mimed, but I sang a live vocal, yeah.
But you got away with it.
I got away with it. If you go onto YouTube and watch one of my appearances, you can see me momentarily all at sea.
And would you have liked to have had a hit single as John Shuttleworth?
Spencer, I did. I reached number 96
Right.
with I Can't Go Back to Savoury Now. Now, I know that's not the top 75 or the fun 30. No, it's number 96. Yeah, I'd love to have had a hit, yeah.
And there's always next year anyway, isn't there?
I mean, that's the other interesting thing. Of course, a hit single has become a lot less cachet to that. Most people don't know what number 1 is now. Do you know what number 1 is?
I don't know.
No, neither do I. At one time, everybody knew what number 1 was. We cared about that.
So we need Top of the Pops back for that.
I think we do, and we need to know what number 1 is, and number 2, and number 3, and number 96.
OK, Graham. John Shuttleworth, very nice to see you. Thanks very much. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And I won't put you on the spot because Graham's fellows was saying what's number 1 at the moment, and actually whatever you said, I'm not sure I could answer it.
No, I've no idea. I mean, I think this is the point, and this comes across again and again and again. Writing the book, researching the book, talking to people about the book, talking about the programme. The power of it, you know, was extraordinary. You know, 25% of the adult population were watching it at one time at its height in the 70s. Millions and millions of people. The power of it's terrific. But of course, when it launched, there were only 2 black and white television channels. It carried on throughout all the different stages. I mean, I suppose you could argue the first nail in the Top of the Pops coffin was the video. I mean, we all remember seeing that Queen Bohemian Rhapsody video for the first time. It wasn't the first rock video, but it was certainly the one that really laid the grounds for the revolution that followed. And I suppose when Axe decided they didn't have to make the trek to the Top of the Pop studio, they could film a video that could then be shown. That was one nail in the coffin, but the whole pop landscape, as you know, Spencer, I mean, it's changed so much now. The charts are dictated by the internet, by personal computers, mobile phones, all this modern technology that neither of us understands. Back in the day, we heard a record we liked, you went out and bought it as a single. If you really, really liked the act, you then buy the album for 37 and 6 or whatever. That was the landscape into which Top of the Pops was projected.
Is there a problem now, though, that Top of the Pops can't really come back? I mean, I haven't used the word celebration in this programme because the programme has to be tarnished because of Jimmy Savile, because of Gary Glitter, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think the brand has become contaminated. I think, unfortunately, I mean, I have to say, we were talking earlier about all the books I'd written, and I have to say, quite honestly, hand on heart, I don't think I've ever had as much enthusiasm talking to people than I have talking about this book. There is a genuine fondness and affection for the programme, and I think it's a genuine tragedy that the programme has become tarnished by Savile. You know, he was a despicable human being. The scale of what he did is unforgivable. But I mean, the programme was always bigger than any one act any one person who ever appeared on it. And as Mark Lewison pointed out earlier in the show, I mean, the Beatles, the most influential rock band, not just of the 60s, but of all time, the group that still remain the paradigm by which all bands are judged, they only ever made one Top of the Pops live appearance. Elvis never, Dylan never did it, there were clips of their music on there. The programme was always bigger than any one person. So I think that's something that you have to adhere to.
And I love the fact that in your book you've got a lot of research there, and you've been to what I think is my favourite place in the whole world, the BBC Written Archives.
It's fabulous.
I could buy the house next door quite happily.
It's fantastic. What is? I mean, as the last time I was there, you went in. There was this handwritten letter from Brian Jones pleading for a slot on the Light programme for his group, the Rolling Stones, with Mike Jagger, vocals, harmonica. Yes, I mean it's absolutely proud because the BBC was run as a bureaucracy very much in those days, and everyone had to apply. So yes, so there was some terrific stuff we unearthed down there, but also just looking through biographies, books. I mean, I hadn't realised that Pete Townsend admitted the reason he began that windmill style of playing his guitar was from Top of the Pops appearances, because he said sharing a stage with Keith Moon, the camera was obviously going to go towards Moon, and he said the only reason he could get the cameraman to look at him was if he did that windmill thing playing the guitar. So that's all down to Top of the Pops.
Great. And did you find anything at Caversham about the Top of the Pops record label, which did these cheapo covers of things? Because I always felt they'd just taken the Top of the Pops name and were capitalising on it.
Well, they did. I mean, and in a sense, that proves the power of the programme. I mean, there was the Top of the Pops, yes, the label. I mean, can you tell the difference between these and the... I mean, I think the LPs were 14 and 11 or whatever. This was way before the Now series, which of course has original acts on it, but this was sort of sound-alike. Elton John, for example, made quite a comfortable living doing sound-alike versions of hit songs for those programs. But there were Top of the Pops annuals. There was the Top of the Pops magazine. Top of the Pops 2, of course, came on. There is an interesting enough, even as I was writing the book, in June 2013, Cadbury's conducted a survey to find out what the British public most wanted to make a comeback, and rightfully at number one was Top of the Pops. So there's this tremendous brand identification, and I do think after Doctor Who, it is the best loved programme of the BBC put out over the years, because it came at that time when British music was conquering the world. From the mid 60s to the mid 70s, you had this incredible period, this golden age of pop, the best of which was coming from the UK, and of course Top of the Pops reflected that.
And Elton John was quite an industrious lad, wasn't he? Because he was on Top of the Pops as a backing musician as well.
Yes, young, the artist formerly known as Reg Dwight. Yes, he a piano player for the Hollies and I think Brotherhood of Man. Again, like Bowie, he'd been round the block. By the time he became a star, Elton and Bowie had been, chivying away at the coalface for a long time and were desperate to get on. I mean, the programme had this tremendous power, and I mean, even grumpy old men like Morrissey, I think, appearing in The NME and appearing on Top of the Pops remain career highlights for so many people. And Steve Blacknell, my co-author, got some great interviews with people for the who'd appeared on the programme, and so many of them said, the highlight of their life was appearing on Top of the Pops. I mean, Midge Ure said it changed his life, and the second comment was how tiny the studio was. They were expecting the Empire Pool Wembley or something, and what they got was a sort of a cupboard at Television Centre.
OK, well, let's move to my final interview now, my fifth chart maker. This is someone who had a hit, went to number 3 in 1986 with My Favourite Waste of Time, Owen Paul. And I asked him, what had made him cover that song by Marshall Crenshaw, and had he got his own songs as well?
I thought I would do a thing, make my own band noise from the punk days.
Yes.
From 1979, 78, something like that. And then accidentally I made a noise by a guy called Marshall Crenshaw, and it was a song sung by Bette Midler, and I heard it one time and I thought I can make that better. I know it might sound like sort of it's easy to say that after the fact, but actually I thought I could make that better. And I did the song, recorded it really quickly. The Bette Midler version is okay, but my version was like the ultimate version and it's true now 30 years later, that is the ultimate version, but they still haven't paid me enough for what I did. But anyway, that's just me.
And did you feel at the time that it was going to be a hit?
We knew within about an hour. With the guys in the band, they were rehearsing the song and playing the stuff, we knew right away. The guys in 10cc would tell you the same thing. When they heard that I'm Not in Love, they knew. They're like, that's not normal, that's going to be big. And when we did Favourite Waste of Time, we knew right away.
And you start off with the title line.
Yeah.
Well, that's unusual, isn't it, in a song? You normally build up to it.
You're right, actually. Normally it's like, what's the verse and what's the thing? But we knew the chorus was My Favourite Waste of Time, and we knew right away it's going to be a smash hit. And I knew my record company would be like, can we have more of that? We got into like loggerheads because they wanted more songs like that.
And what was being on Top of the Pops like? Was that your first television appearance?
I'd done some other TV things. I'd done TV AM, and I'd done Pebble Mill at 1, which went wrong. Something really basic, like the technicians hadn't paid attention to what was being given to us in the track. Anyway, it didn't harm me at all. When we did the track and it didn't work, even now, like 25 years later, people can still watch it on YouTube and laugh at it and stuff. And even now, it doesn't harm me. It's fine. When most people go, oh, but you had a really problem with Pebble Mill at 1, you know what? I didn't. In that week, we were selling 50,000 singles per day, multiplied by 5 days, which is a way more than you could sell now, even in your dreams. James Arthur, dream on.
And what about being on Top of the Pops? Did you enjoy that?
Yes, I did. And I brought my mum. But the first time, when I heard the music of the theme tune, which was written by, I think, Measure and Thin Lizzy guy, Phil in it was awesome. We heard that in the dressing room, and my heart was in my mouth. I was like, oh my God, I've lived with this for like 40 years or more, and here I am doing it for life.
And this book, Top of the Pops 50th Anniversary, is this in all the bookshops, or what's left of the bookshops?
All good bookshops, and obviously online. McNider and Grace are the publisher. I mean, it's £25 is the cover price, but obviously these days you can get it a lot cheaper. And thank you, Spencer, as ever. Always do like some great records.
It's a very thank you, and well, thank you for the invite to the party. I wouldn't have done all these interviews.
Well, no, it was great, and I have to say, what better way to start Christmas than have Joan and Louis on the accordion? We're all going dubba dubba dum dum dubba dubba dum. No, it's great.
What, I've had you singing, I've had Mark Lewison singing in this programme, whatever
next.
But the book does look great, all the Top of the Pops logos and everything like that. It's terrific.
It's very nicely put together. I think it's a real treat for people who do remember the programme. And it's 42 years of memories, and one of the most enjoyable things in researching and writing was talking to acts who'd appeared on the programme. And of course the BBC Bar, which featured in that BBC4 documentary quite prominently last night, that was the place to be. I mean, wouldn't you love to have been a fly on the wall to hear what Edge Cutler and the Wurzels had to say to Bob Marley and the Wailers, and Tony Bennett had to say to the Ruts,
Yeah, well, people can read your book and find out some of these conversations. So thank you very much for coming into the show today. Patrick Humphries, cheerio.
Thank you, Spencer.